Jen Duplessis. What's up, Jen?
Hi, good morning, everybody. Good to be
Good
here.
morning.
I
Thanks for
missed
making
you.
time. Yeah, miss you. I guess it's been a few weeks, and congratulations on another grandchild.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you.
All right. And then we have Michelle Town, $100 million producer out there killing it in the market, bringing the perspective of what's happening in the trenches. Hey, Michelle.
Hi, everybody. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Good to have you. And then our special guest today is Steve Scanlon, Coach Steve Scanlon. He is the founder of Rewire. And I asked Steve to be a special guest today. And Steve, thanks for on such short notice to say, yeah, Dave, I'll jump in. I really appreciate that, Steve.
You bet. As long as we can keep the topics I know anything about.
Well, I can't promise you that in this format, but it'll be fun to actually have you say, hey, I can't answer that. But I've never had that happen before, so I'm not worried about it. But all joking aside, Steve is an expert at change. You know, he founded Rewire on the concept that there's clearly the art of change and the art of coaching, but there's a lot of science. There's a lot of brain science. And, you know, we may get into that brain science. I'll leave it to you, Steve. But last week we were talking about emotional intelligence. And I almost felt like, hey, not like we weren't even qualified to talk about it without having Steve Scanlon on the call. And so I wanted to keep that conversation going in a couple different ways and just talk about change management, talk about emotional IQ. And then a big topic, I did a quote on Facebook where we talked about, hey, if you want to make your mortgage practice resistant, bulletproof from Amazon Mortgage and any other, Costco lender online, you just need to amplify your empathy. You need to amplify how you communicate with people, and you need to amplify and get great at executing an advice-based mortgage practice. So I thought having Steve on this call would just be a great leader. So Steve, do you have any kind of opening comments just overall around what referral-based loan officers need to do when it comes to emotional IQ and improving on, how they show empathy to borrowers and realtors?
Well, it's a fairly both broad and deep topic, as I know you know. Do I have any opening comments about that? Dave, I'll dive right into the trenches with you because people don't have time for a lot of fiddle faddle, I suppose. This season within mortgage banking, it seems like what I'm hearing and have heard over the last, call it the first quarter and then into the second quarter, but particularly lately is just all the upheaval, right? Margin compression and certainly that's compounded by your Costco's and Amazons, but loan officer compensation and just all this stuff that seems to be cascading down the mountain. And I had a leader tell me that he actually believed you could go back as far as 1982, where interest rates were in the mid 18%. No one can fathom that today. 18%, right? In the early 80s. And really since then, we've had a cascade. The rates have just gone down, just basically until recently. I mean, yes, we had some ups and downs in the late 90s and whatnot, but we made it all the way down to 3%. And really since 2000, we really haven't had an increasing rate environment for the better part of 18 years. And so many people, I think, in this business, I hate to say it, but we got used to thinking that the business, we had these low interest rates, and now that they're increasing, and we certainly know that we have a lot of pressure around, how many homes there are and just out there, and if rates increase. And so there's all this pressure. And just like you said, and now we've got people wanting to enter the business. And so, yeah, I think you're right on the money. I think empathy is a good thing, but I think in general, people have to, for the first time, look in the mirror and think, I have to change. I can't rely on mortgage banking being the catalyst of change for me. I have to change. And for you to say you need to grow in empathy and all that stuff, I think that's right on the money. I think the question is how. I think a lot of people don't know how to do that. To be honest.
No doubt. And I think when there is time of stress and time of chaos, and let's just say bad things happening, opportunity. I always, the people that navigate those stormy waters with the highest level of emotional intelligence and that show up in the marketplace with the highest level of empathy, they win. They win the biggest. And my job at Mortgage Coach is to make sure that our community of mortgage professionals, achieve their peak, their peak performance. And so let's talk about some of the hows, because you coach both the C-suite in the mortgage space, you coach individual operators in the mortgage space, and you're on this call right now, and there's going to be over 100 people between Zoom and Facebook. There's going to be several hundred both leaders and loan officers listening to the recording when we post it on YouTube. So, this is your chance to kind of talk to a big group around, guys, this is what you should be thinking about. And then maybe throughout this conversation, we can get into some specific tactics that people can go through to grow in that way.
Yeah. Well, if you want me to dive into the how, I suppose the first thing I would do is it's going to be a horrible metaphor, so forgive me for the metaphor. But if somebody has an addiction problem, if somebody has alcohol or drug addiction or something else, we all have heard this saying, the first step in this is recognition that you have a problem. If you can't get people to that recognition, you can give them all the steps in the world, it won't matter because they don't see it. So I think one of the things that we're trying to do is get people to recognize that change is necessary, that it needs to happen, and it's not external. I just a really quick anecdote, Data. I worked with a company, and I would not say who, and by the way, it wasn't even in mortgage banking. But I worked with this company, and they had me interview their entire team for a week. I interviewed, it was like 50 or 60 of their top leaders. And then at the end, I got this group of people together that were their senior leadership, and there were 10 of them sitting in this U shape in this room. And I stood up in front of them and I said, after interviewing all your people, I got to tell you, you guys need to change. And their comment was, like, collectively, a few of them even said it. They said, yeah, they sure do. And I was like, well, wait a minute. No, you guys need to change. And they kept saying, yeah, they do. That's why we brought you in here to help, get them to change. And I literally had to stop and go, I don't think you get it. Joe, Susie, Billy, John, you personally, you need to go through change. And at that point, I was just a little less popular. Like, wait a minute, we thought you had, no, we need to do this. Like, if you're on the call and you're in mortgage banking, which you are, I'm telling you right now, you have to go through a change. If not, the change that the industry's going through could very well wipe you out. And I'm listening to a lot of people say, I can't believe this happened and that happened. And there's a lot of victims out there. And look, margins are getting compressed. Things that are real are actually happening. You can choose to sit around and gripe and wish for the old days or whatever, or you can wake up, look in the mirror and say, I personally need to go through a change. I need to go through a transformation. And so if people don't recognize that, I think, I heard a good friend of mine one time say, you might be dead and just not know it yet. Right. And that's a little stark, but I think first step, Dave, is recognition that not that you have a problem, but recognition that you need to change. You need to alter the way that you're thinking in this market. Obviously, technology plays a role. Obviously, how we're doing the business plays a role. But like you said, Dave, if you recognize that and you're willing to go through it, this could be an amazing time for you. An absolutely amazing time.
So let's do this. Let's bring up that Simon Sinek interview that I asked you to watch, and it was 3 minutes. By the way, anybody who's watching this call, I posted this a couple days ago in the Mortgage Coach Productivity Mastermind. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm going to put a link down below. So in this video, you can watch it. And by the way, if you're watching this on YouTube, I recommend you just pause this video right now, go watch that 3 minutes, and then come back and watch the rest of this conversation. But there were two things in that industry, in that video, that I think let's talk about it, and then let's spend as long as we want talking about it. But Simon Sinek did this metaphor, and he started off with, from a marketing perspective, what do homeless people and Microsoft have in common? And by the way, for everybody watching this, take away Microsoft and say loan officers. What do homeless people and loan officers have in common? And it started off with the way we market, and he used, homeless person as the example where, they've all got a sign saying, a tragic story. And at the end of the day, when you give them money, you're giving them money for goodwill. So you feel better. And long story short, Simon changed the sign and he made it more focused about the customer, not them. It wasn't about them. It was about the customer. And he basically doubled, that homeless person went from making $20 to $30 a day, working 8 hours a day, to making 40 hours in 2 hours by just changing the message. And so if you're on this and you're watching this as a mortgage professional, I want you to think about the conversations you have with realtors, the conversations with buyers. And it's a lot like Microsoft. It's a lot like the homeless people. It's about me marketing. So I think that's one big takeaway. Now, I think the takeaway that you're really good at addressing, Steve, not that you're not a good marketer and you and I couldn't riff around that marketing for a long time, but he talked about the perspective that the person quit working in 2 hours. Like they made the $40 in 2 hours, which is more than they usually do in 8 hours. And that was like, I'm done. I'm off for the day. I don't have to prospect anymore. I don't have to do a total cost analysis on the next deal. I don't need to show up and do my perfect loan experience because, I kind of hit what I need to hit. And so let's talk about changing the narrative. And if you don't mind, and by the way, I kind of broke down that Simon Sinek video the way I took it in. If you want to break it down to set up this conversation, feel free to, go through that.
Well, yeah, I will first tell you that you did have me watch that. And frankly, in practicing a little bit of metacognition of my own, it sort of pissed me off. I didn't like that video at all.
You know what? I knew that. I knew you weren't going to like that video.
I didn't like that video at all. And you want to know why?
Why?
Because I didn't think of it.
Funny.
I thought it was brilliant. So I did have a little.
I actually thought you might have an issue with the whole, like just knowing you. I didn't know if you'd like that metaphor.
I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was a brilliant metaphor. It just made me mad because I didn't think of it. I shouldn't. I think he's incredibly creative, and I thought it was a brilliant thing. And so, like you said, first of all, it's 3 minutes, so people can go watch it and interpret it for themselves. The two components of one, putting yourself in the space of the homeless person and thinking about your message differently is just brilliant. The second part that I think you want to probably dialogue more about is the fact that the person quit after 2 hours because they hit their number. And I don't know if mortgage people do that or not, but the whole point he made was that's a narrative.
Hey, Steve, can I interrupt you real quick? Because one, we know that mortgage people do that. Like you just said, I don't know if they do that or not. We know that they do that. And then two, I also want everybody who's on the community, after you watch it and you upgrade your message, I would love for you to comment in this thread. So whether you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook, I want to, as a community, the best marketing is a team sport. How did you change your message? Put a message down below that you changed. But I just want to make sure, let's recognize everybody does that.
Yeah. Well, I think by you saying does that, the homeless person had a sign that said, help me, I'm poor, I'm whatever. And they changed it to being more about, hey, if you give once a month, please think of me the next time. And so they shifted that. And I think that shift could be, I don't know that everybody, Dave, has a me message. I think you probably do have some people in the community that have done a pretty good job of shifting that. So
it's true. It's true.
Your point about that is then by all means, let's share that, because if we could become a more customer centric industry, and that not just from a marketing perspective, but from a heart perspective. Right. So that's the one thing. And I do think that was a great takeaway. And I thought the juxtaposition of Microsoft and the homelessness was really fantastic, by the way. The second piece of it was the narrative part. And I think I emailed you back and said, narrative circuitry is something I've been studying now for a long time, because how we say our narratives to ourselves, we have this saying in English, just so you know, that perception is reality. And we all know that. And we all say that like we know that. But I don't think people step back and realize, wait a minute, perception is perception. It may or may not have anything to do with reality, right?
Good point.
But I know what people mean by that. And by the way, if our perception and our narrative works for us, well, then who cares? Then may your narrative work for you until the day is long. But I think what you're talking about is all of a sudden, the narrative of mortgage banking has changed, and you're asking the question of your group, has yours? Because if the narrative around us changes and we don't change ours, then all of a sudden the narrative that you keep could not work for you. And that really frustrates people. And that's when you start to hear people complain and moan and this and that, and there isn't this, and there aren't enough homes on the market, and this is happening. And they perceive that to be reality without thinking, how can I change how I look at it and my narrative? I think if the step one, first recognize that every single one of us scientists, let me give you a quick little bit of science around this. There's some really, really cool studies around what they call narrative circuitry. And the second part that they compare it with is what they call direct experience circuitry. So direct experience is, the best I can say it without getting overly scientific, is what's actually happening, right? Like you could get off a call with me and go, wow, Scanlon was kind of pissed off and mean and mad today. And somebody else could go, no, I thought he was speaking the truth. And everybody's got a perception of that. Well, what's actually happening? What's actually happening in the moment? So they call that direct experience circuitry. So most of the studies that I see show that most people live their lives, about 90% of their entire existence is lived in narrative circuitry. 90% is the stories we tell ourselves. And so, Dave, to your point, and the reason we're having this call is what's really cool, I think it's cool, is you don't actually have to tell the same narrative. We have a choice. I think it's one of the greatest God-given things we were ever blessed with, was the choice to choose a narrative. So if your narrative today is things are bad and margins are compressing and things aren't good, and then you want to prove to yourself, which by the way is called confirmation bias. We all do a lot of confirmation bias. If you think things suck and it's bad and it's hard and rates are going up and there's no inventory, you'll go find people and tell that story to and get buy off on that. And that's called confirmation bias. And it basically what we're trying to do is prove our narrative through our networks. And so it takes quite a bit to break through that and go, wait a minute. What if I would consider a different narrative? And I actually practiced this. I did a workshop in California a couple of weeks ago. I did something that was a little risky. And I literally had a group of, it was realtors. I had a group of 300 realtors. And what I had them do, Dave, is I said, I'm going to give you a topic and I want you to think about it. And the topic is Donald Trump. I want everybody to think about what they think about Donald Trump. And you can hate him, love him. You all think something, even if you think it's neutral, that's still something. And I had them practice meeting in pairs and practice telling the opposite story of what they thought. I'm not asking you to believe it. I just want you to practice telling a different story. Let's say you hate him and think he's a buffoon and all this stuff. I want you to practice telling a story. You know what? He's cleaning up Washington, and practice that. Not because I'm trying to I'm not trying to I don't care what you think. And it was amazing how some people simply could not do it. They would not do it. I cannot and will not tell a different story there. I used an extreme example just to prove the point. It was hyperbole, and I understand. But would you be willing to wake up tomorrow, and if you've been having a tough time, and to use your stuff, Dave, because I love your stuff. I have people say, I hear people say this. Yeah, I have Mortgage Coach, but I don't use it as much because I'm busy doing this or I'm busy doing that. That's a narrative. Would you be willing to change that? And I think in a season where the industry is going through such phenomenal changes, I know this is extreme, and people that speak say extreme stuff, so forgive me. But I want to suggest that if you don't change your narrative, you could be in trouble.
No doubt about it. And I think that no matter what seat on the bus you sit today, if you're sitting on the bus and you are a top producer and you're having better results than you did last year, you still have people around you that aren't, that you lead, that you influence. And if you're on the bus, which is a lot of people on the bus today, that you're not achieving your personal goals. And by the way, I know that everybody's not, because at the beginning of every year, I ask everybody, how many loans do you want to close? And the kind of the lowest option is, 60 to 120, less than 60. By the way, I never have anybody at the beginning of the year say, I want to close less than 60 loans. I mean, that survey option is just not answered when we do the survey. But when I ask everybody at the end of the year, how many loans did you close? There's a lot of people under 60, what they want and what they got, even in great years, where rates are low and, records are being broken, that happens. So I know there's a lot of people not achieving their goal. Before I ask you another question, Steve, because by the way, I'll tell you the question just so you have time to think about it. I want you to give everybody some exercises or some thoughts on how to change the narrative. So be ready to kind of we obviously don't have time and you're not prepared to walk us through what you did when you did that, 300 loan officer or 300 realtor event. But I would like to help people, give them some tools and thoughts to change it. But before I do that, I want to give Michelle, do you have any questions for Steve, or do you have any, comments so far in the conversation?
Well, first of all, I love that. I wrote down the narrative trick-or-treat and the direct experience trick-or-treat, and the stories we tell ourselves. And an example in the origination world will be, we used to sell ourselves as selling the lowest rate, the lowest cost, the lowest everything. And if you're doing that right now, you're going to lose, because Amazon or Loan Depot or Quicken or somebody's going to come in and do that. So a year ago, we started revamping how we were sending our message out, where, we changed it to our experience levels, our value propositions, that I don't, when somebody comes to me and asks me, are you going to give me the lowest rate? I'll go, no, but I'm going to give you the best experience, because I got to get their mind off of it. The other thing I do is I don't even quote my rates until after I've quoted the payment. So I kind of changed that, where somebody used to call in from one of my Zillow leads and they go, I just need to know your rate. Well, now how I change their story a little bit, or help change their story, is I'll go, well, here's what the payment would look like. Does that sound good to you? And they'll go, yeah, that's great. And I try to get them off that rate quote. But there's going to be people that, I have a client right now that it sucks. I've been working with her a year, and she's very honest with me. She goes, I'm all about the lowest rate. And I say, well, then we probably need to stop working together, because I'm going to give you a competitive rate, but I'm not going to give you the lowest rate. But that's not what matters anymore. So I try to change their narrative, but sometimes you can't. Some people are, like you said, how do you describe Donald Trump? If you are an avid Trump hater, to tell your mind to say something good about him is going to be really hard. So I would like to hear some of the tools that you use as well to help us get off that one particular, how do we get off that, our belief system, and change it into, a narrative story instead.
Jen, I want to give you a chance. By the way, Michelle, that was great. And thank you for giving some, kind of real world examples. That brought up a whole nother conversation, not only how to change your own narrative, but how to actually, reframe and create a new narrative with the borrower. We could spend a whole call on that. Jen, any questions or thoughts so far?
Yeah. So, Steve, as you were talking about narrative, and of course, you and I've had a lot of conversations about this in a lot of different places. I immediately wrote down narrative versus excuses, right? So, if we have excuses, the component or the opposite of that is, if you find yourself, if you're hearing yourself or telling yourself, or someone's telling you an excuse. The flip side of that is, how can I change that narrative? I think that would be a really easy way for people to recognize that they're accepting, and I can't use all your words because I'm taking copious notes, but all your words, but they're accepting that perception, of it. So I think, I'm not driving, I'm sitting. Excuses versus excuses versus narrative. The other thing I just wanted to comment, is, I got in the business in 1983, and rates were 18.5%, and we still did loans. And everyone always, this is again, an excuse I get all the time is, yeah, but housing prices were cheaper. And I say, yeah, but your income was cheaper. So it's all relative, right? So it is a shift. And I have to say, and hopefully this is an aha moment for everybody. One of the reasons that we're all attracted to this business is because of change. We absolutely love change. If we didn't, we would have a 9-to-5 boring job. And the reason we don't, and the reason we don't leave and go to a 9-to-5 boring job, is we love all our flexibility. We love the constant change that it gives us. It's like crack. It is. We are just addicted to change. But it's funny, when the change is us needing to change ourselves, we're much more apprehensive about accepting that change, when it's much easier to allow the change to happen externally by whatever's happening in the market. So I just wanted to share that. That's all.
So Jen,
I don't know if that means anything.
That was great. And so I want both you and Michelle, before we wrap this up, to think about a narrative that you have that you might want to change, that you're willing to share with the community. I also want to ask everybody, before we unleash Mr. Scanlon and he walks us through some ideas, I want everybody to get clear on some change that you could make. What is a narrative? And we could stay focused on the mortgage professional. As a mortgage professional, whether you're a leader and you manage people, is there a narrative that you could change that would help you execute better as a leader? If you're a loan officer and, whether you're hitting your goals or not hitting your goals, is there a narrative you can change? And by the way, if anybody on this call is clear on that, and you can just write it down and share it. If you're on Facebook, share it in comments. If you're in Zoom, share it in Q&A. I would love to know the narrative that, different people in this community are going to go after. And by the way, this is going to be recorded. You might be watching this in YouTube. I would ask you to put it on pause right now. And actually, what is a narrative? So you can kind of really start making the rest. We've got like 30 more minutes now. So we've kind of set it up. We got 30 minutes now. I would love for people to go, okay, what is a narrative? Am I the negative news? Is that how I'm showing up with my team? Think about, what is a narrative you could change about yourself? And so back to you, Steve.
Well, I want to address Michelle's comment first. I thought what you said was really, really great. You made me take a note, and I put it up on the board. You've changed how you're speaking to people. But make no mistake, when people come in and go, what are rates, what are rates, what are rates? That's because there's some very powerful entities, organizations, and people doing their best to make sure that somebody else's narrative is about rate. There's someone more powerful with way more people and way more marketing prowess than you have, and you sound like you got a lot, that is doing everything they can to make sure the narrative is about rate. So if you're not an absolute pro at combating that, you might get your butt handed to you. So it sounds like you're doing a really wonderful job, but just keep in mind that somebody else, everything we watch and see and do is somebody trying to make sure that whatever narrative that person's using, that's what marketing is really all about. And so when Amazon gets into this, they're going to do their best to change the narrative. And I think the good news is if we recognize this process, I think we can beat them. I really do. Because I hope the narrative that you're trying to give borrowers is one of integrity and honesty and something that's actually good for them within the process and everything. Because it's not just that it's not about rate, but, you know, I think one of the, if Dave, I saw you were doing scripts or whatever, which are kind of like narratives. Anybody that asks about rate, you know, depending on their behavioral pattern, I think something really good to say is, I'm more than happy to give you a rate. Before I do, could I arm you with 5 better questions than that, so that the next person you call doesn't just give you a rate and you run the risk of getting to the closing table and getting something that you didn't bargain for? Can I just give you some better questions? You know, that's a, you know, there's some people that are going to go, you're my guy, right? Just for that, you know? So just know that, you know, look, narrative, somebody's setting it somewhere, because people aren't just making up the rate thing. And so getting really good at that is good. And to Jen's point, I do think we like change, but then she said in the end, but we don't like to change. And so that's what we're talking about. You picked an industry that's fluctuating, and Jen, maybe you're alluding to the fact that we like the dynamic nature of that. But really what we're talking about is, if that dynamic nature serves us and its rates are going down and it's good, if it serves us, hey, great. The minute it doesn't, if we don't change our narrative, then the industry is against us, people are against us, we become victimized, and there's just going to be a lot of people that get blown out because of it. And like Dave said at the beginning, to me, this could be kind of like they said in that, you know, the movie Apollo 13, this could be our shining hour. For a lot of people, this is going to be the best year because of all of this. And I think it's largely because they're intentionally choosing to say, what is it that I can do to wake up and tell a different story?
So, Steve, there's been a couple comments and questions come in that I want to address. So I've had Luke come in and said, hey, I'm doing much better this year than I did last year because I changed, you know. And then I had another, actually a text message come in from someone that talked about how they've changed the narrative, and they actually recommended that folks check out the Script Palooza call that we did a couple of weeks ago. And I think, in just hearing the conversation you had, Steve, and hearing this conversation, one of the things that makes, you know, call it those scripts so great is that most of the time it's the loan officer changing the narrative. You know, like when I interviewed Danny Harani on this Tuesday, and he talked about his professional expectation script, you know what he's doing is he's changing the narrative. Now in his case, instead of focusing on rate, he's focusing on work with me because I'm going to help you get the house that you want. Not pay too much, but pay enough so that your offer gets accepted. That's changing the narrative. So anyways, I just wanted to bring in some of those comments and some of those questions because I thought they were on point. Back to you.
Well, I thought you did a really good thing. I'd be really interested, you know, I don't know that people would be willing to throw up here on their chats or whatever, but when you said think of something, you know, and you guys, I think maybe what people are hoping for, it's 9:34 here on the left coast, right? Is that I'm going to give you 5 simple ways to recreate your narrative. And I don't want to disappoint anybody. I can give you some tangible things. I just want to let you know that for some people, it could be possibly one of the most difficult things you ever do, ever. Because again, we keep using this word narrative. Most people don't see their narrative as narrative. They're listening going, yeah, but there really isn't any inventory and rates are going up. And they think what we're trying possibly to do is evade reality. There is reality. But the challenge is, for most people, there's a great Hebrew proverb that says, all a person's ways seem right to them. Right? I do another exercise in my workshops where I literally say, okay, I want you to stop right now and I want you to log down all the thoughts that you're currently having, right now that you know you're wrong about. And it's so great as an exercise because everybody sits there for 5 minutes and can't write a thing, right? Nothing that anybody on the call is thinking right now in this moment do they think they're wrong about. Nothing. So I just want to suggest that you might, now if you give the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that uses logic and language and reason, if you give it enough time, you can look back and go, I shouldn't have said that. I know I can do this differently. So sometimes we need time to do that. But in the moment, everything we think we're right. Everything you do, you justify in your own head. So when we talk about changing the narrative, what I hope doesn't happen is that people get off the call and I hope that, you're going to have a difficult time thinking what I think about the rate environment, what I think about how I say this. You don't think it's wrong. You might need to spend a little time. And the other thing, here's a step for you. If you'd have the courage to do this, ask somebody else. Ask someone close to you. Ask a team member what they think might be a narrative that you have to change. You might not see it yourself, right? And that's very difficult for some people because it's, by the way, when you recognize something as a narrative that's not reality, it's jarring. It's like, it's like watching a movie where something wasn't real all of a sudden. And it can be very jarring, but also very freeing because at that point, then you have a choice. So there are people on the call that could choose right here, right now to say, you know what? I'm going to wake up tomorrow or Monday and I am going to have a positive message. I will rebuke negativity. I'm going to take the 3 things that I said I'm going to do. I'm going to do a total cost analysis with every borrower. And I will not listen to the narrative that says, but this, but that, and I'm too busy. The whole I'm too busy to do stuff. I'm too busy is a narrative. I'm telling you, when I coached for all those years, I coached a lot of originators, and Dave, I'd coach some people sometimes, and I'd come into a coaching call and be like, how you doing? Oh, I'm busy. I'm buried. I'm slammed, hammered. Well, how many loans are you closing this month? How many loans are you closing? 2. Like, wow. Like if you're closing like 1 loan a month, I used to tell people, I think you should be able to go into the forest, chop down your own tree, chop it into bits, mulch it, make it paper, bleach it onto white, type your own stuff out and deliver your own documents into the secondary market by hand. Like you have the time. But people, we fill the gap that's allotted to us. And so everybody you've met and everybody you meet, regardless of what they're doing, is busy, which is hilarious. Because the next call I'd get, it would be someone like Michelle or Jen. How are you doing? You guys are busy and you're slammed or whatever. Well, how many loans are you funding this month? 46. It's like, well, it was the same conversation. And so that's what really led me into going, wow, what people are telling themselves is really amazing. So anyway, I again, if you want me to try to come up with more tips or whatever, I'll give it back to you if you have any other questions.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to center on a couple of things because people have, in terms of narratives that they want to change, here's some stuff that has come in from the community, and I'm putting it in kind of 3 buckets. One of which is I need to change my narrative around my prospecting and the stories I'm telling myself. And I've seen this question come up in a lot of different ways, but they're not prospecting enough and they're letting themselves down. And then since we are in mortgage coach land, while everybody is on the mortgage coach team and has a total cost analysis, not everybody gives it to every borrower. And so the narrative usually is either I'm too busy or this guy doesn't need it. Like he needs it, he doesn't. And they're telling a narrative about themselves around that. So I don't know if we want to get into any of that tactically, but I do want to make sure we give people, just some, I love like the actionable item. If you can't come up with things that you should change about your narrative, go to someone close to you. Go to your branch manager. I'll bet he has a narrative. By the way, if you have a team, go to your production partner and ask them, hey, I really want to improve myself and show up as a leader in the best way possible. What could I change? And ask your production partner or assistant, whatever you call them. I guarantee you they've got something. People above you, people below you, they'll give it to you. So I think that was one great practical tip. I'd love more practical tips. And then I would love to help mortgage coach members prospect more, use total cost analysis more.
All right. Well, Dave, really quickly, I want to challenge you because you challenge me all the time. Let's say your narrative is, I'm too busy. I know I need to prospect more, right? By the way, anytime you use the word should, you are, if ever I should do this or I should do that, that's a trigger that you're using a narrative. A should is a conditional response between what your prefrontal cortex knows, what could and should happen, but what you're actually acting out. So anytime you, in your own language, in your own head or out loud, use the word should, may that be a trigger for you to look at a narrative. Okay? Anytime we do that, I should go rake the backyard. What narrative am I saying about that? That's kind of interesting. So, but where I wanted to challenge you was, let's say somebody says they're too busy to prospect more. I want to challenge you to think, what the narrative isn't, I should prospect more or I'm too busy. This is a deep dive, folks. I don't know how long I'll have on, maybe this will be my last mortgage coach thing. I'm always one step away from saying something to Savage where he's like, all right, that's it. Scanlon's done here forever. I don't know.
Never.
Okay. Well, but my question to you is, what's another possible narrative that's actually going on? Because this is the deeper dive. And this is the stuff that people avoid. I'm busy is a narrative, but it might not be the underlying narrative. What's possibly the underlying narrative to I need to prospect more and I'm busy? What do you think?
Well, it's confidence, confidence to do it, energy to do it, emotional fortitude to do it. I'm just riffing.
Yeah.
By the way,
lazy.
Yeah. What if it's fear? Yeah. What if I get rejected? What if it's, man, I haven't called on realtors in a long time and I don't even know what to say anymore. And, this or that. And what if there's a really deep sense of rejection, a deep sense of fear that, believe it or not, could be, I'm not saying it always is, but that could be the underlying narrative. And I tell you, when you uncover that deeper narrative, man, you're right on the brink of doing something really amazing, because you could get back to direct experience and start to ask some different questions. But I just wanted to let you know that a lot of times when we get into this dialogue, if we leave people with, man, I need to listen to that narrative, I need to prospect more, and I'm too busy. That's right, I'm hearing that. You might actually dive a little bit deeper to really get to what the narrative is at an unconscious level, mind you, because you got to bring that to your consciousness. And if you do that, you're really close to solving something. I just want to forewarn you, though, very difficult to do. It's a very deep dive. And some people, they might be on the call right now going, can't this guy just tell us how to do more loans? I don't want that deep stuff. But it could be very well another deeper dive that people need to do to really hear something deeper. And when we get there, it's very, very powerful.
So I got a couple tactics. We just got another one. One, get perspective from people outside of you, both above you and below you. What could you change? If you're not doing something, whether it's the total cost for everyone, prospecting, really get deep on why it's not. And by the way, sometimes, probably a lot of times, you need to go outside yourself. If you have a coach, make that a month-long project with your coach, that I'm consistently not doing blank. Help me get clear on it. If you don't have a coach, get an accountability partner, get a friend. By the way, Steve, you were going to say something. What should they do?
Well, okay, so I'll practice my own medicine. I almost dived in and said, my company does coaching. And
well, I was going to give you that opportunity.
All of our coaches are what we call mindset coaches. We don't do traditional, just go prospect more and I'm going to hold you accountable. We really dig into this further. But you know what my narrative said just now? I was like, I don't want to say that on the call because it sounds like I'm selling something. And so I almost didn't say that because I was like, I don't know if Dave likes that or whatever. So we do this so quickly, right? And I don't want to come off like Johnny's sales guy. But did you hear how I did that? And I caught that. And I was like, that's really interesting. But I believe in what we do. And I think we've got some just freaking remarkable people, all of whom are certified with the Neuro Leadership Institute. And we do some really, really cool, and we do help people with that. But I almost didn't say that because my narrative said, ooh, I don't know if I'm going to sound like sales guy. So I worked through that and said, the heck with it. If you don't like that, whatever. I get
I more than like that. I mean, obviously you brought value to this call, but I wouldn't bring you on this call if I didn't think the ultimate way you could serve our community by people who engage with your organization. So everybody on this call, there's a few ways to connect with Steve. I mean, they do coaching, and they also have a great, group coaching program. So I highly recommend that you engage. And you still, I haven't checked it online, but do you still have that lizard brain test?
Yeah,
where people
and that's free. Anybody can go to rewireinc.com, REWIREINC, and check out all of what we do. But we offer our lizard quiz. That's an assessment to check out your lizard brain. By the way, the 4 characteristics of the lizard brain, and I've already done this on one of your calls, Dave: familiarity, being right, habits, and control. Right? The lizard brain has to be right. If we think everything we think is right, that is narrative. And so you can actually test that, and the test is free. So go out, take our free test, and if we can help in any way, great. Anyway, I'll get back to
this is important. So one, I'm going to put a link down below if you're watching this in YouTube, link below if you're watching it in Facebook, link below to both the free lizard brain test as well as to Steve's program. And again, I can't emphasize enough the value you can get from that. So let's try to get another tactic. By the way, I want to make sure I throw it back to Michelle and Jen because you both crushed it. Any questions you have for Steve or any comments either one of you guys have? Michelle, go first.
Yeah, Michelle, go ahead.
Hey, hi, everybody. Oops, am I on? Yeah, I'm on. So actually, Steve, I took a lot of great notes. One of the things that I wish I would have listened to this podcast before I just did my drop on a mass email. I'm realizing that we're all focusing on the cost of waiting, right? It's going to cost you waiting. Look at how much it's going to cost you. Look at what you're going to have to bring in. And now I'm sending that negative fear energy out there to the public. And that's what I'm associating with myself up. So now I just read a news script going, well, apparently I'm going to be dropping another one and saying, refocusing back on what the value of homeownership is. What your value is going to be, the tax advantages, instead of focusing on the fear message, because I think that I probably just sent a message out that was wrong. Dang it.
But what a powerful realization. And I know, Jen, you want something really quickly on that, Michelle. A really cool piece of science. The brain spends 5 times more energy detecting threat than it does seeking reward. 5 times as much. It makes sense from a survivalistic perspective, but we seek threat. What that means then is that if people are already doing that, we have to be instruments. And this is why the field of positive psychology, why people like Simon Sinek and why people like Sean Achor and all these people in positive psychology, this is going huge, because if we're instruments, the Neuro Leadership Institute that we're all certified through, they call it keeping people in a toward state. Move them toward something, because the brain innately moves against it. This is why negative marketing and, hey, if you don't do this, you're going to lose. Like if we get off this call, Dave, and we sound like, if you don't change your narrative, you're going to die. I always want to tell people, if you don't change your narrative, you know what's going to happen to you? Nothing. You'll be fine. Right? Now, you might not adapt as much, but if you give people that threat, it already feeds a threat-searching brain, and it keeps people negative. And so whatever your scripts or narratives are, do your best to work with people towards a toward state. Move them towards something, because the brain fights that, and it can actually be really, really powerful for you.
Love that. Jen?
So true too. So I had a couple of notes that I did. When you first asked the question, what is our narrative that we want to change? I still am working on my narrative of slowing down so that I can be present. And it's actually something I started working on a couple of years ago, Steve, when I was with you in Chicago. And it was one of the things that I wanted to change, was to slow down, to be present, because someone had said to me before, you know, I love spending time with you, but you don't seem like you're present all the time. And because, you know, I'm busy, right? We use that. Oh, I'm busy. So I've really worked on that, and I'm still working on that. And so I just wanted to share that with everybody, that that's something I am working on with my team and my office. Not so much with my clients anymore, not so much with my referral partners, because I've really learned to listen to them and to engage with them. But now I need to move it on to some other area. So I wanted to share that. I also wanted to say that another narrative that I'm now working on is my own personal identification with success versus significance. And, you know, I mean, I've been in the business for a really long time. I have a lot of success, but that's not the important thing for me right now. What I'm trying to do is amplify and shine a light on giving based on what I've learned through those experiences and that success throughout those years. So I'm trying to not identify myself as someone who's successful, but someone who is significant and help people change, not in the context that you're doing, but, you know, have a better life. So that's a challenge that I'm working with, because I identify myself by my numbers and not by me, but not by who I am, right? So I identify myself with, you know, I'm only a really good person if my numbers are high. And I think that a lot of people go through that too, and especially if you're at a sales meeting and, you know, they identify, hey, here are the top people in the company and this, that, and the other. And to a certain extent, the rest of everyone is saying, well, so I must not be a good person because I don't do the numbers. So I'm trying to rebrand that for myself. So I wanted to address that. And then the last thing is, I just wanted to say, you know, one of the things that I've always said, and I learned this from Dave Stevens years ago in 1991 when we worked together. When someone says, how's the market? You say, it's unbelievable. It could be unbelievably bad, or it could be unbelievably good. But if you say unbelievable, your self-talk is telling you that we're charging forward. So I just want to share that.
Love that. The positive news. I know.
Yeah.
One thing I've had to do, just because, you know, I talk with the C-suite, I talk with loan officers, some killing it, having record-breaking years, many not. And, you know, one thing that I've done is I've always been pretty light on news. You know, I've had to keep that negative news out of my head. But I mean, I've had to really double down on no news, you know, and cutting that off to remain, you know, I guess the word I always tell myself is to be an inspirational leader, you know, and so I've had to really watch the news personally. Steve, we've got about 6 minutes left. By the way, everybody, Steve put a link to Rewire Inc. down below. For those of you that asked about it, you can connect with Steve at Rewire Inc., take the lizard test, learn about his group wires, learn about his one wires. Any last thoughts in these last 6 minutes, either playing off something Jen said or just something you want to kind of wrap the conversation up around?
Yeah, I love Jen's significance other than success. I might encourage you, Jen, to realize that you're still speaking to a bunch of people who want to have success. So don't take your significance so far where you're only speaking to other people who are in that thing, because there's some people that success is where they are in their season of life. And then I think something else that I dovetailed on is, for some reason, our culture seems to esteem busyness, right? And so a lot of us, we think, there's narrative, we think that by telling people we're busy, we're going to be wanted. And I loved what Jen said. What we might not realize is that often, maybe not always, but often when we're super busy, we're also not available and we're not present with people. And so some of the greatest leaders that I've met are just super present and willing to just be with people. They might be busy, but I would challenge anybody on the call who might still think that busyness is a badge of honor, when all it might be doing is making you disconnected from people.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah.
And by the way, that's a really important point, because I think every loan officer today who wants to have a long career in this business, it's like, I need to use technology. I need to compete with future, tech companies that do loans. And at the end of the day, your ability to be present, because people want a high tech, high touch. And so the loan officer that crushes it, the most in the future is the loan officer that could balance, could go from high tech to high touch, uber presence. That is really going to cement your career.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Steve, so you got the last 4 minutes, bud.
I don't want them.
Yeah, you do.
I would actually ask if there's any other questions from anybody else, if there's anything.
All right. So community, do you have a question from Steve in chat? Something you want to wrap it up around? Also, lizardquiz.com if you want to go directly to the online test and see where you rate from a lizard brain. We're having a lot of thank yous. This was awesome. Love this. It's awesome. Great perspective. By the way, we like that too. So, but if you do have a question, this is the time to ask that. So Steve, I'm going to ask you one last question since the community hasn't asked one last question. You work with a lot of loan officers. You work a lot of C-suite. What do you think is the perspective? And you pick it, whether you want to talk directly to the C-suite, talk directly to loan officers. What do you think is a narrative that you most commonly see that people need to change?
Well, I now I've got a bias because I was just I'd have to actually think about that, Dave. You asked me questions like that, and that would be one I'd have to think about to answer as honestly as I could. Busyness is certainly one of them. I think that was a great one that Jen brought up, that we have to change that narrative. And then the other thing, I would go back to the maybe the deeper narrative about what are some of the possibly things under the surface that aren't the thing I'm saying, but is there something bigger and deeper about how I perceive myself, my fear of rejection, my fear of missing out, whatever. Are there some deeper biases and fears that I have that I might need to dig into? So I know that's not as specific as you want.
It's okay. It's real. Here's one from Stuart. How do I stop the narrative of me complaining about the lack of company provided leads?
Well, that's a great one. The fact that you recognize that as a narrative, I hate to say it, but that's like you're 90% there. Now, there are some things that you can do, but if you never saw that even as something that you were saying, and I don't know, by the way, by the looks of that question, are you still possibly looking at the fact that, do you want to tell yourself like, that's a truism? They do have a lack of company provided leads or whatever, and if they're going to continue to do that and that bothers you, you can either, you can either do something about that, or, maybe you got to go get your own leads. Maybe you've got to do it some other way. That might be just something that you have to look at.
Yeah, I say own it and figure it out. Don't rely on anyone to solve that problem. If you have the ability to create leads, you could do it. So we've got one last minute. I don't know if we're gonna have time for this, but Mike Thomas said, if people fear loss more than they desire gain, the status quo narrative, how does moving them towards something motivate them more than avoiding loss?
Wow. Do you have a shallower question right at 10 o'clock my time? Like,
so we can save that for another one.
Yeah, save it for another one. I'll give the gentleman this one thing. If you're up for it, and I recommend this to anybody, there is a wonderful book. It's fairly extensive and deep, but it's still amazing. and it's by Daniel Kahneman, and it's called Thinking Fast and Slow. Thinking Fast and Slow. It's an amazing read that speaks about our different biases. How do we do this? How do we do that? So it's one of many works that are out there these days because neuroscience is exploding. But Daniel Kahneman, Kahneman, or something like that, Thinking Fast and Slow. I think that work does a pretty good job to do that.
Yeah. Hey, this has been fantastic. Steve, thank you for coming in, being so transparent, bringing your wisdom. We appreciate it. Michelle, as always, thank you for being part of this community. Jen, grateful for all the time that both of you invest in giving back. Everybody that's watching this, if you got value from this, give it a like, share it with your mortgage friends. And, you know, the community that we built, this Facebook mortgage coach, productivity mastermind, is just awesome. For everybody that's asking questions, for everybody that's commenting with something of value, I appreciate it. And I know that all the mortgage professionals that are tuned in appreciate it. Hope you guys have a great Memorial Day weekend. And Steve Scanlon, have a good one, brother.
Thank you, guys.
Bye, everybody. This call is a wrap.